You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas, the barbecue capital of Texas, and therefore the world. Today, returning to the show is, other than Tucker Carlson, I'm not sure there's a bigger name in, let's say, journalism, media on the right than my guest, Auron MacIntyre. He's back with us today. I appreciate that he makes time for shows like this because he is in demand. His new book is out now. His new book, The Total State, is out, and I highly recommend getting that. We're going to talk about a podcast of his own called Conservatives Must Reject Ideology. Auron draws upon some of the best thinkers really in political and realpolitik history, and you can see that in his analysis here, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Let me tell you up front, you can support this show at patreon.com/counterflow. $5 or more per month gets you in our exclusive club where we have our Zoom calls every month, not recorded, not posted, private. We can do as we please. I'm setting it up for this month right now. I didn't do it during Lent last month, but this month I'm setting it up as we speak. And so that should be happening quite soon. If you want to join, go ahead and do that. And let's just get to Auron. Now he's over with Blaze Media. He's a big name. Auron MacIntyre is the host of the Auron MacIntyre Show and a columnist for Blaze News. He's also got a Substack. He offers thought-provoking and mold-breaking insights, drawing from the best political thinkers throughout history to make sense of our current political climate in a way that is easy to digest. I don't always read word for word a bio for someone, but that perfectly describes and explains Auron MacIntyre. Welcome back to the show, Auron MacIntyre, sir. How are you?
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, let's I hate doing this, especially we're about to get to this. In fact, I'll get to it right now. I think other than maybe Tucker, as far as right-wing media goes, I almost don't like that term anymore, but whatever. Right, media on the right, you are probably the biggest. And Martyr Made, I think it's Daryl Cooper, I'm sure you saw this, wrote, every time Auron MacIntyre weighs in to frame an issue, within 24 hours, my timeline is full of people, including prominent ones, repeating him. That's not a bust on him, but shows how effective Auron is. Sets the tone more than most prime time cable news hosts, which I think is a good thing considering the level of most prime time cable news hosts are at. Having said all of that, give the people a quick intro for you, and then we'll talk about this book coming out.
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly kind thing for Daryl to say. It's I don't really know how to react to that other than amazing company to be in. But yeah, book is coming out tomorrow. The Total State. It's kind of the story of my intellectual journey. Like a lot of people, I think I was kind of in the normie conservative talk radio, just mainstream GOP type sphere, and then started listening to a lot of voices and reading a lot of people that I had otherwise never heard of after the events of 2020, and that kind of put me on a place to kind of re-understand and reimagine the way power works and politics works, or the way I understood it at least. And so been lucky enough to kind of have this opportunity to end up with a show on the Blaze and a column and now the book. So it's been wild, but yeah, that's how the book's coming about.
And as this show drops, for the audience listening, the book is already out. As we record, it drops tomorrow. The book is released tomorrow. When you listen to this, it's already out. Go to Amazon and get The Total State by Auron MacIntyre. Let me ask you about what is the demographics as far as, I want to talk about the old boomer conservative legacy type people. We're going to get into that in this discussion versus, let's say, the new right, people like yourself, Tucker. I mean, it's a big tent. I think we could put Curtis Yarvin in there. What is the demographic as far as that particular divide goes for the Blaze in your audience?
Well, people will ask me what my audience is like, and I always joke it's 1/3 anonymous Twitter frogs, 1/3 boomer conservatives, and 1/3 Christian nationalists.
Okay.
So I feel like that's kind of the weird overlapping bubbles that I end up speaking to, even though I'm not myself a kind of like a avowed Christian nationalist. But that does seem to be the way that my audience links together. I think what's happening really is, for a very long time, kind of the mainstream kind of Reagan conservative coalition had dominated, the neoconservative coalition had dominated for a very long time. And I think a lot of people who were very passionate GOP voters rightly felt a gratitude to that coalition for kind of the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Soviet Union. But this was kind of the split that happened with the neocons and the paleocons, right? You had the Pat Buchanan types who were in the Reagan administration, were on board with a lot of what happened when they were fighting the Soviet Union. But when it was over and we kept invading people, even though like the threat of the evil global empire was over, they started to say, wait, something has gotten away from us, And I feel like there's been this like slow motion reaction where the kind of boomer con, or kind of the legacy conservative base, has known for a while that its interests are not being represented in the party, but they didn't know how to voice that. They didn't know how to say. They all of kind of the frame and the rhetoric that they had around their ideas had been set for decades by neocons. Mm-hmm. And so now I think what you're seeing with the emergence of the new right is people saying, no, there was a right wing before this. Like there's a tradition that existed before this. It actually cares about the people of the country. It's not about ideology. It's not about free trade and global markets. It's about caring about the people. And when that involves free trade and that's good for them, you do that. And when it doesn't, you don't, because what you care about first and foremost is America. And that's what you're actually trying to conserve. That's what the phrase conservative should actually mean. And so I think that while it seems like these two groups had been at odds for a while, I think actually the legacy conservative voter, like not so much the media is still lagging, but the base is catching up very quickly, which is why Trump had the power he had, and why so many in the conservative establishment were terrified of him. Because he represented, and Trump is not an ideologue, so I don't think he had like neoconservative, or rather a paleoconservative stamped somewhere in his playbook. But I think he represented the spirit of a lot of people who knew this, who knew that the party was not fighting for them and wanted a change. And so I think that coalition is coming closer together. I think that while there is still a divide, and you still do have a lot of people who are listening to Sean Hannity or whatever every night, more and more of those people are saying something's not right. Especially like the Gen X cohort and after are really making that move very quickly. And so I think that's the big change.
Yeah, I grew up. I'm not in Austin. I'm outside of Austin now, but I grew up, let's say, from year 20 in my life on in Austin, and I used to listen to Alex Jones on this FM talk radio station. There was, for the most part, conspiracy type people. And then here I am watching Alex as a very mainstream figure at this point on Tucker Carlson show. It's just, I hate that tired old phrase of I didn't see this on the bingo card thing, but I certainly didn't imagine that would ever happen. I want to ask you, did you happen to see or hear the debate between Prager and Dave Smith? I know you've been on Dave's show. Did you hear that debate that they did?
I didn't. I heard it was going to happen. I'll be honest. And maybe there's something that would surprise me. Maybe it's worth going back. But oftentimes I look at these debates and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what every word of this is going to be before we even step in. Because to be clear, when I was a very normie con, talk radio guy, I loved Dennis Prager. I listened to Dennis Prager all the time. Listened for years. Thought he was great. And to be fair, I still have a certain affinity for Dennis. I think there's still a lot of lessons that I learned as kind of a young guy who was trying to understand politics that are still applicable from him. But obviously, when it comes to the issue of Israel and engagement in foreign wars, I know all the things that Dennis Prager's going to say. I've heard him say them for years, and I know what Dave Smith's going to say, and Dave's going to be right. So I just ended up watching that one.
And well, what I took from it, and I want to ask you your opinion on this because you are in media, and you're what I would call alt media, and I would call Tucker and Alex alt media, even though Tucker, I mean, I would call Joe Rogan that. I don't mean the size of their audience necessarily, but it's the way they go about presenting their case or the facts or an interview or news or whatnot. It's alternative from, let's say, the boomer legacy media that we've been so used to for so many years. What I took away from the Prager Smith thing, and Dave said this on his review of the debate, Prager's a guy that's been studying this topic that they debated, Israel, Palestine, and Hamas, for 40 years. Dave Smith jumped into this topic 5 to 10 years ago, and Dave demolished him. And I know I'm like you. We go into it thinking, of course, Dave's going to be right, and I did, but it was a destruction on a level I've not seen. And what I took away from it was these old boomer legacy media types on both sides of the aisle. They're used to talking in quick buzzwords, sound bites, quick, get your point out. And the alt media is used to deep diving into an issue and prepared to break it down thoroughly. You know, we mentioned Martyr Made at the beginning of the show, and he does that probably better than anyone. Yeah. Do you see that in the world you're in? Like, there's an old version of media that's very used to quick buzzwords, talking points, get it out there, versus the new media that's maybe a little bit more well researched. Do you run into that?
100%. And to be clear, these are different skill sets, and I do think that the long form is healthier. But I don't want to just say it's only about only the intelligent people do an hour. There are plenty of 3-hour long podcasts I'd rather shoot myself than listen to. So to be clear, it's not just because I did a longer podcast I'm smarter.
Correct.
I have to do TV hits, and then I have to do 3-hour sit in for 2 or 3 hour podcasts. So I have, I feel this shift. Like, I feel this weird shift of like, okay, I need to be able to talk about the same issue in a tweet, in an essay, in a 5-minute TV hit, and in a 1-hour podcast, right? Like, I need to, and a lot of people don't have that. And that's not a knock on them. The dominant media format for a very long time has been those small chunks. Even when you're in talk radio, technically you have a 3-hour show every day, but really you're only ever talking 5 to 6 minutes at a time before it's the next commercial break and you throw it to something else. And so the idea of an extended back and forth between people is really hard for a lot of these guys. And so, yeah, I think a lot of them, are used to having those kind of back and forth really quick. I think also on this issue in particular, I think that a lot of guys are kind of used to having a relatively ignorant interlocutor who just hates the country, right? Like one of the problems that I think that kind of the narrative has run into, especially with kind of like a relentless support and material and financial support for Israel under any circumstances, is that most people just didn't know the background, are just completely unfamiliar. And all the people who were, like, maybe we don't need to do this, like, genuinely hated America. Mm-hmm. And so when you have those kind of people, it's pretty easy to like sound better than them because they are actually just garbage people. And so like you don't really need to bring much to the table. But when you have a guy like Dave who doesn't hate his country, who isn't malicious, it's not about him, but he's just like, no, like, obviously there are two sides of the story. And I think I would say I am not as far as Dave down this road. Like, I think he's probably got a little more animus, like open animus, and to Israel in a particular way, as where I'm just like, I just don't want to be involved. Like, I don't think this is my money. I don't think this is my problem. This is not my country. These are not my people. And I just don't like, I wish him the best, whatever. Like, these two people hate each other and one of them's probably going to wipe each other out. And that's just the really ugly and sad story of human history. But I'm a political realist. So whatever, like, that's just not my problem. And so, but I do think that Dave just comes off as somebody who is genuine and does care and is not like hostile to the people of the United States. And so therefore, when he gets in a room with somebody like Prager, who's just expecting the other person to look like human garbage, because that's often what he's dealing with on the other side, he doesn't know what to do, because that kind of reflexive I'm the good guy because I'm on the side of the West thing isn't there for him.
Yeah, well put. Do you think, let's go over, you did a piece, an episode, I should say, discussing how the right should ditch ideology. And I think both you and I have learned some lessons from Curtis Yarvin over the years. And I think his content and input is healthy for the right. What are some things that you think, let's say, older right type people or quote unquote conservatives, what are some big lessons they need to, not need to, I don't like prescribing like a need, but maybe that they should learn?
Well, like I said, I think there was a big shift when kind of neoconservatism took over the American right. And one guy I've been going back and reading, and I think people should do this, is Russell Kirk. He wrote The Conservative Mind. And this is cited by a lot of people as like one of those foundational texts, right? It's like God and Hale, or what's the name of Buckley's book? God and Man at Harvard or Harvard. Anyway, It's one of those, right?
You know what's sad? I should know that. And I'm so embarrassed to say this, but heck, I'm repenting of sorts. That's who I was named after. Yeesh. But yeah, it really is. That's my middle name. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So I think that I think it's one of those foundational texts that people reference, but very few people go back and read. And if you go back and read it, Kirk really talks a lot about the critical nature of like abandoning ideology. That the conservative is not an ideologue. He is not there to push a particular worldview. He's not there to push a particular agenda. He doesn't care for the abstract. What he cares about is a particular people and a particular way of life and a particular being. And because of that, he is there to conserve that which he loves about his home and the people around him, his community. And so it's not about picking a particular, here's my foreign policy, here's my economic system, here's my way that we handle criminal justice. No, it's not about taking a particular, creating some kind of grand unifying theory that applies to all people in all places and solves the political problem for all time. It's about recognizing that there is a specific group who you love and you care about, and engaging with the things, the policies, the decisions that will better their lives, right? Thomas Carlyle called this the condition of England question, right? I care about a specific people. I can't put it on a spreadsheet. I can't quantify it. I can't put it down as a mathematical formula. The only way to know who the people are and what's good for them is to get down in the nitty gritty, live life with them, and then, kind of build things as we go. But we love experts. We love scientific, accuracy. We love policy papers. And so I think the big thing that the people on the right need to learn is that we have to return to the idea of caring about a people. We have to know who we are. We have to have an identity. We have to stop being scared of identity. We have to understand who we are. We have to have an identity. We have to have a discernible culture, a shared moral vision, an understanding of who we are. And then we need to make decisions on how best to take care of the people in our country, rather than saying, this is the uniform policy that we apply to all peoples in all places, knowing who we are and then following that. The true conservative is about conserving the American people and their way of life, not about making sure that they get the right policy positions as presented by someone from the National Review in 1960-something.
Right. Do you think there's almost an idolatry type myth of, let's say, small government and versus reality and how it has been and will seemingly always be?
Sure. This is again what I heard, when I was a mainstream, conservative talk radio guy. Small government. What is conservatism about? It's about small government. But we never talked about why, right? Mm-hmm. What we heard was it created personal liberty. Well, that's not actually the goal. Personal liberty is not actually the goal of society. Human flourishing is the goal of society, and by that I don't mean some kind of abstract Sam Harris, human flourishing. I mean, we know a particular people. We know what is good for them, their community, their society, and we work towards the betterment of that community. one of the things that we quickly learn as, hopefully people who are moving to the right is that it's not just liberation that actually brings fulfillment. What we really want is virtue. What we really want is a virtuous society, and virtue can only be practiced inside the constraints of duty and dependency on each other, right? And so, I think that when we talk about big government or small government, we forget that the only reason to care about small government, the only reason the small government is actually valuable, is that it allows for other social spheres to compete with the power of government and provide support and meaning to people's lives. Small government is valuable when it allows the church and the community and the tribe and the family to fill in and provide meaning and purpose and structure and guidance to people. It's not just good because it's good. And in fact, there can be detrimental parts of a small government. So for instance, Sabbath laws, right? Blue laws. Like these are there. Yes, they are big government in that they restrict the actions of people inside the community, but they're actually there for the betterment of the community. By protecting the church and the family from the marketplace through blue laws, we keep the market from consuming those competing social spheres that actually keep the government under control. When the church loses its power, when the blue laws go away, when the Sabbath becomes just another day to do business, then what happens is not the power of government shrinks. What happens is the power of government grows, because the competing spheres, the church and the family that were honored on Sabbath, they shrink in power and they lose their ability to restrict government. And so that's one of those things where we feel like small government, oh, that's just this universal blanket good. No, it's only good in the sense that if we have a small government, we are able to have a small government because we have other healthy organizations, other healthy institutions in society that lift people up and carry them through the day.
It seems like the right, and this is culturally on many levels, they're very good at wanting to shrink back and be more traditional on certain levels, but there's always this void left to be filled, and the left, I don't think there's anyone better at filling a void than the left, because it's kind of the you give them an inch, they take a mile type of thing. And I think there's this red pill manosphere argument back and forth with feminists and whatnot. It's like, well, feminists can emerge because men aren't being men and they're leaving this void to fill, and so women aren't made to fill it, then things get crazy. Anyway, I can go off on that for a long time. But there's this other thing you touched upon in a recent episode, and you're so right in this. Is such a tired argument, and it drives me crazy. I grew up in libertarianism, and I heard it, and I said it often, is that, oh man, you can't give the president or these governors or whoever this power, because then the bad people get in there and they'll use it against you. And it's just like this cop-out losing game, the beautiful losers, as Sam Francis says. But can you talk about that and why that's so ridiculous?
Yeah, the episode you're talking about is Eric Erickson, who's this kind of old school National Review. He was on CNN, he was on Fox News, and he really is just kind of one of these neocons who has all those kind of really basic arguments that you're talking about. We got to have small government. If we use power, then it'll set a precedent, that our enemies will use it against us. It's like, okay, but if you look at literally every other interaction, the left just wins. Right. Yes. Like, so you can hold that opinion that was probably a cute opinion back in the 1980s or in the 90s. But unfortunately for you, like, we have several decades of evidence about like whether or not your theory works. And the answer is definitively no. Like, they locked you in your house. They shut down your church. They like rigged your election. Like the idea that the left is just going to be like, well, we don't, they didn't use power, so we're not going to use power. In fact, like, clearly that doesn't work. And the problem is that Eric Erickson and kind of that general argument, that libertarian argument that you're talking about, takes away the only tit for tat mechanism, right? The whole idea is supposed to be, if we use power, then our enemies will use us, so we have to restrain ourselves. But if you won't, if you always restrain yourself and you never pay your enemy back for using the power, then you've removed the very mechanism you're talking about to restrain the power. You have taken away the threat. You said, well, the mechanism is mutually assured destruction, but I'm going to tell you in advance, Russia, that we will just not nuke you.
Yep.
Like, we're just never doing that. Yeah, we understand in theory mutually assured destruction is what keeps us from launching the nukes. But we want to make it clear that under no circumstances, even if you were murdering all of our citizens, we would never fight back.
Yes.
Like, okay, well, then you've actually removed the deterrent you were talking about.
Yes.
And that's what happens to libertarians and conservatives. They say, well, here's the deterrent mechanism that's supposed to be built in the Constitution. But we would like to make it very clear that we will never use that deterrent mechanism. And then they're surprised when their enemies are like, okay. And then they just crush them.
Yeah. It's like going into a boxing match or something. And one guy says, well, I don't believe in physical violence, so I would never hit the person. And it's like, well, cool, you just lost. Do you think the GOP is the right vehicle to affect actual conservative or right-wing change or governance?
I think the GOP is garbage. I think it's hot garbage, and it has been for a long time, and it probably will be for the foreseeable future. However, there's just a reality about how the American voting system works. It's a two-party system. It's not because it's established in the Constitution technically, formally, but that's just how the math works. That's how the way that our system is set up has worked. And so I don't think that the GOP, as it stands now, as it's currently constituted, will do anything. Like, they're useless. It's just garbage. I do think that something called the Republican Party probably will be the vehicle for an actual right. Like, I think that you'll probably see, we're already seeing shifts inside the Republican Party, even things like the Heritage Foundation, which are just, kind of the most establishment. And I'm not saying you should trust this stuff. I'm not saying, the Heritage Foundation is not going to ride to our rescue. But I'm just saying, even these organizations are seeing how important it is. If you talk to anyone under, 45 in kind of mainstream Republican politics, they all understand how desperate the situation is.
Okay.
Right? Like, they all know, things have to change radically. Some people are further down that road than others, but I think pretty much everyone understands something's got to change. And ultimately, I think what we'll see is, it's probably not Trump. Trump is probably the prototype. He's not the final product. But I think eventually there will probably be a personality that drives change more than a party. And the party will simply be the delivery mechanism for that person. A lot of people were very scared about Trump changing the Republican Party, and I think they should have been, because I think he did. I think they kind of shattered the establishment in a way that it's not going to get put back together again. And the question is kind of, what does the Republican Party become now?
Yeah, he has the weirdest, I call it a superpower. And I think I don't even think it's planned out. It's just kind of who he is. The second he enters a situation, it's like certain people just unmask themselves or reveal who they actually are. And, we saw this with the Never Trump types and Mitt Romneys, and it's people you suspect, like, I don't think I trust them. And then all of a sudden Trump enters the whole picture, and it's like, they show you who they really are. He's speaking at the Libertarian Party conference coming up in a couple of weeks. And all he's doing is speaking there. And I started seeing the same thing happen there. I can't call myself a libertarian. I'm now a liberal and stuff. It's like, how does he have this power to walk in a situation and people just start showing you who they really are? It's bizarre. But I want to ask you, one of the things that this is a fault of mine, but I get heavily annoyed when I hear a friend or parent who's a good Christian conservative bragging about how they're sending their kids to a university. Maybe I shouldn't be annoyed by that, but I just want to shake them and go, do you know what they're preaching literally at these universities? Can you talk about let's say, what's your message, Auron, to conservatives on what's happening on college campuses? We can say broadly speaking, and then specifically with, of course, right at the moment, these riots.
Look, I'm sympathetic to the average parent, right? The average parent knows that there's really only one avenue to kind of elevating your social status in the United States. It's a bad one. It's a terrible one. There's a lot of problems with it, but it's the same problem that like conservatives have with the public school system, right?
Yes.
They know the public school system is a disaster that's destroying their children. But at the same time, they're being robbed at gunpoint for money to fund this thing. And they've had a society set up where most of them have to have two parents working all the time. and they can't take care of their kids. And so the only option for them to like really, for most people who, I mean, God bless people who go out of their way to homeschool or private school their kids.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be realistic. Like, let's get off our high horse and just look at the average person. They simply can't go out of their way to go ahead and, and take care of their kid all day and educate them. The same thing is true when they're trying to get them, kind of on the right track. Yeah, there are people who recognize like, I need to get my kid into like, the specific trade school or whatever. But even then, like you need conservative lawyers. You need people on the right to like fight your lawfare for you. So you can't just run away and hide and like everyone become a plumber, even though a lot more people probably should become plumbers. But the idea of just completely abandoning these things is also difficult. So in one sense, I have a lot of sympathy for people who are like, look, I got to get my kid into a school, and so, that's how they move forward. So I think rather than like chiding parents who are trying to send their kids to good schools, even though they should go in with their eyes very wide open about what's happening, and they should make it very clear to their children where they're going and what's happening, and like, make it clear you come back with several different colors of hair and and talking about how you're going to transition. That's the end of you going, like that. Make it very clear that there's a lot of things tied to to kind of what they're doing. But I think ultimately, if the right wants to get serious about this, they have to shift the way that we do accreditation, the way that we do credentialism in the United States. Yeah. We have to get to the place where people do not have to go to evil left-wing seminaries and pay them $100,000 in order to get a decent job. I mean, I just did a story recently. Sheetz gas stations, right, are now unable to run a criminal background check on their employees because it violates the Civil Rights Act, because it turns out more minorities commit crimes and therefore more minorities fail background checks, and therefore a criminal background check is de facto a racist way to screen for employees. And we have to understand this is what college degrees actually do. They are proxies for I should be part of a ruling class. But when you push this all the way down to gas stations, of course, everyone's going to go to college because you can't get a job anywhere without this, because no one's allowed to have any other common sense way to actually hire people. So first, conservatives have to start walking the walk. Do you have a business? And if you have the business, do you hire people from colleges? Because if your answer is yes, well, then you're propping up the very system you're telling me you don't want to send your kid into. You don't want people to send their kids into. Have you looked for other ways to screen your employees? And are we figuring out how to strip out, these problems in civil rights law that keep us from having basic aptitude tests? Can we go ahead and set up a situation like we have in tech, where there are a large number of these kind of training courses? You can get an A+ certification, this kind of thing, where you don't need a college degree. You just go and take the certification test, and that shows that you have the ability to go ahead and work in the field. Like, are we looking for alternatives on how to credential people? We can complain about the university system as much as we want, but until we create a scenario where people can get good paying, high prestige jobs without going through it, nothing is going to change.
What do you think this is another, I think a lot of the theme that we're discussing is older style ways of doing things versus kind of a new energy, let's say. What's the proper reaction from people on the right to these riots on college campuses?
I understand the impulse. Conservatives see institutions under attack, right? They see American flags taken down, Palestinian flags go up, and they say, we got to get involved. We got to protect people. We got to restore order. That's entirely reasonable. However, you got to understand that ultimately these are left-wing zones. These are left-wing seminaries. These are two factions of the left fighting over the left-wing church. Why are you going in there? What is the reason to go in there, right? The only reason is to what? Rescue these people from their own civil war. There's a serious number of fault lines in the Progressive Coalition. To be really clear and really blunt about what the Progressive Coalition is, it is a mystery cult of power that is entirely constructed around the idea that these people have the right and responsibility to rule the chuds, to rule white middle Americans that should have their stuff confiscated and reallocated to the classes that are, who are the the recipients of goods from the left, from the progressives, and that is the whole reason they work together. Because otherwise, what are trans rights activists doing with Muslims, right?
Right.
Like, if they were in a Muslim country, they'd be killing each other, or, well, one side would just be killing the other side. But the point is, if they were anywhere else, they would be tearing each other apart. The only thing that keeps them from tearing each other apart is a shared enemy. And so if you can allow these people to break apart across their natural fault lines, that is a serious blow to them in an election year, right? You have, a bunch of people screaming like death to Israel while the other ones are like running around waving flags that are not American flags and talking about why that country is far more important to them than the United States. They can have that showdown and we can just stay out of it. There's no reason to run in and save these people. I know that there's been kind of the frat boys, controversy about whether or not that's a problem. But like, again, I don't blame any frat guy for just not wanting this garbage on their campus. I don't think that they're the bad guys. I don't think that they're plants. I don't think they're useful idiots or anything. But there is a natural gravity that happens here where like one guy waving an American flag gets between these two sides and says, and says, no, it's about me. And all of a sudden they both turn to him and say, oh, look, there's a white frat guy we can attack instead of each other. Let's do that. And we're already seeing that. We're already seeing them pull away. They were protesting a supposed genocide last week. This week, what are they protesting? White frat boys, right? And so it's just one of those things. I think it might be inevitable. I don't think you can really like discipline everybody to be like, no, this is the exact political tactic. These are the optics you need to be involved in. And nor do I expect that. I'm just saying that those are the dynamics that are playing themselves out. And as much as possible, the right should just let the left fight each other.
Yes, well put. You also spoke recently about, I think I have heard Curtis Yarvin speak on this, but I can't say 100%, but the removal of endowments from universities and then using that to pay students. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, actually, this wasn't a Yarvin one. The first guy I ever heard this from was Will Chamberlain. He talked about the seizing of the endowments, and then him and Nina Stepman have talked a lot about the need to go ahead and use this as a way to capture the student loan forgiveness issue. So the student loan forgiveness issue is one where conservatives naturally lash out, and understandably so. Like, it is a leftist patronage scheme, right? The whole thing is we're going to take a bunch of money from plumbers and business owners and people who didn't go to college, and we're going to steal their money and use it to pay off the useless college degrees of the people who vote for us. So they are the knee-jerk reaction to this, the hostility to this is fair. However, again, you have to understand the average person who just wants to get a good job, just wants to be a manager at like a store somewhere, probably needs a college degree. And what has happened at this point is that there are a lot of people who otherwise probably would have just gotten a normal job, gotten married, started having kids, and started voting Republican in their 20s. Instead, have dumped their entire down payment on a house into going to a progressive seminary, getting brainwashed, not getting married, and becoming this dependent leftist activist. And so you can be really angry at them, but there are a lot of people who would just like to live a normal life, but are victims of this system. And so the way to solve this problem is you seize the endowments of the left through, in these universities. They have these massive endowments. You seize them through extremely high taxes. That's right. We're the right. We're bringing high taxes specifically on this organization. These people have abused the tax code, pretending that they're nonprofits, but they aren't. They're making a massive amounts of money and funneling all of it to their left-wing activist buddies. So just take that money, use it to pay off the student loans, strip out any federal guarantee of student loans, and go ahead and return them to being bankruptable loans like any other loans. So there's not some special protection so you can hand out $100,000 to a kid who doesn't even have a job yet. And banks and universities actually have to be on the hook for failure rather than just giving them a free pass and putting it all on the average voter. And then again, strip out the civil rights protections that are supposed to be there in theory to protect us from this evil racist, populace that doesn't exist, and instead return people to the ability to hire someone based on an IQ test or an aptitude test or some other alternative credentialing mechanism. And that way, you are getting rid of this heinous leftist monopoly on credentialism. You're defunding the institutions that are destroying your society. You're returning us back to a point where people who need degrees like engineers and doctors can get them back to affordable levels. And you're allowing the average person to get a real job without going to this insane institution. And the businesses will be happy because they can hire competent people again without getting them brainwashed full of HR mumbo jumbo that turns their business into some kind of leftist nightmare.
Yeah, it's turning businesses into like this bureaucratic mess that the federal government has been turned into decades and decades ago. One of the things I've learned recently from seeing what's going on these college campuses with the riots and whatnot is, wait a second, they can send in law enforcement for a riot? Because I could have swore just about 4 years ago that wasn't happening. Everything was being allowed seemingly to burn. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is my biggest takeaway from all of this. And I think above anything else, that should be the very most consistent message the right is having. Obviously, we are just fine with sending in the police and the National Guard or whatever to break up protests and protect people from violence. Actually, that is just fine. And we are totally capable of doing that as long as the right people are being threatened and the right people are being held back, right? And that's fine. So that means that the 2020 riots were voluntary. In fact, they were approved by the government, which was, of course, always the case. But now it's just as on display as it can possibly be. Because if the governors and everybody, and let's be clear, left and right, a lot of the governors snapping to attention right now are conservative governors who have suddenly found the ability to protect their citizens from this kind of stuff, even though they were completely unable to do so apparently during the 2020 riot season. And it really just shows us, it gives the lie to the idea that there's some kind of political restraint on the ability to use force to maintain order. These protests are put down because they're pushing back against a group that exists under the leftist protected class structure. The 2020 riots were not put down because they were attacking a group that was not protected. It really is just that simple.
Mm-hmm. Do you see this problem changing? The problem, as I see it, is very often through my lifetime, your lifetime, the right conservatives, we could call it Con Inc., whatever you want to call it, does this silly thing where it's like the left designs the playing field, the left makes the rules, the left provides the referees, and then the right tries to play within that framework rather than saying, we're not doing this. Do you see that as a problem that exists? And if so, is it changing?
It is, of course, a huge problem that exists. It's maybe the fundamental problem that exists is that the left does not have access to the wider consensus manufacturing apparatus in the United States. So what happens is that the mainstream media, the education system, all of these things frame an idea. And then the right has like a couple of think tanks and a few smaller outlets, and they kind of maybe cobble together a message if they're lucky. That is only ever a response to this. And again, you can see this very much from just the protests that we're looking at. Very quickly, the right has adopted this idea that this is actually the right's problem and that they need to step in, and it's about the frat boys, and we need to fundraise for them to make sure that more frat boys will stand up on these college, rather than just letting the left kind of duke this out. And so you see this over and over again, that the right just steps into these frames and inhabits the narratives that the left wants. Do I see this changing? Yes, to some degree. I mean, the good news, as you said, is we have some alt media now. Twitter breaking free is a huge deal. It means that the right has a consistent place to go ahead and, kind of work these issues out and kind of refine an idea. However, it's still just not going to compete with the left. So the kind of the total hegemony that the left had on these kind of spaces is gone. But it's still not sufficient. And I still see the right, kind of running into this full speed. The problem is, we have to remember that all of this, even the left, is not some unified monolith. It's a ever shifting set of it's the Hydra with many different heads, and they're competing and snapping at each other. They all have a general goal of destroying you, but they're not moving one direction all the time. And the right is the same thing. There are many different factions within the right, but it's even looser. It's even more poorly coordinated, has even less power. And so, like, expecting them to all get on the same page and push the same message, it's just not going to happen. I wish it could happen. Like, no one's going to make, as someone should make Chris Rufo, like, just the guy who runs all of this stuff or whatever. He's just the magister of, whatever, setting up this narrative. But it's probably just not going to happen. And so I think that we will see a right that is increasingly more effective in messaging. We've already seen that with guys like Rufo on the scene. But I don't think we're probably going to see a right that is unified and setting the narrative anytime soon, unfortunately.
Do you think, I think, and I want to ask you about this, there's some good people. I don't know if it's per se Project 2025. I don't know enough about that specific deal, but I feel that there's some good people that would agree with us on many issues in Trump's ear and trying to, let's say, infiltrate Trump's circle, campaign, whatnot. And it does seem to me, whoever he picks as his VP will be a signal as to who he's listening to, if you will. Do you see that? Am I wrong on that? And what are your thoughts on the VP pick?
I'm not sure what the importance of the VP pick is going to be. Normally a VP pick is one of two things. It's either like a way to get somebody like Dick Cheney in the office, right? To actually run the campaign or run the White House, or it's kind of a Mike Pence. We need to pick up a state and shore up a constituency inside our coalition, and so I'm going to pick this guy. At this point, Trump is so wildly polarizing that I don't think that any kind of I wasn't going to vote Trump, but now my governor's on the ticket, so I guess I don't think that makes a whole lot of difference. And I don't think, the concern with like Pence was like, well, he needs to shore up, the evangelical or vote or something. Evangelicals like him more than they like Mike Pence at this point. So I just don't think that same dynamic exists at this point. I really don't think it matters who the vice president is at this point. I think it's the Trump show all the way, for better or for worse. Now, would I love to see a master tactician in there? Would I love to see somebody who knows all the plays and is going to go ahead and play 5D chess from behind Trump? That'd be fantastic. But who even is that, right? Who would you even slide in to kind of handle that kind of thing? I think Trump is surrounded by there's some better people, or I should say, at least there's an effort by multiple people, Project 2025, Heritage, and others to try to put together an actual, a right-wing deep state, if you will. How do we swap out this current existing bureaucracy and replace it with something that is actually going to let us govern? I think that does exist, and that's much better. But honestly, whatever they're planning, it needs to be like 7 times more severe. Like he needs to come in there like Sulla with a list of prescriptions. Yes. Like Trump had generals commit treason, and they laugh and mock him in public.
Yep.
Like, things need to get real. Like, they are trying to put him in jail. So like if he wins again, he needs to come with a level of commitment to completely remake the government. And he needs to be willing to shatter things like the FBI and throw them to the wind and start from the ground up. And if he's not ready to do that, then he and anyone who works for him is going to end up in prison. They're going to die in jail. People need to get ready for that. Like, that's already the case that they tried to put a large number of Trump's last administration in jail for just doing their jobs. If you do not come back and shatter the system that tried to do that to you, they will most assuredly make sure they do it this time. So that's just something that anyone thinking about working for the Trump administration or with the Trump administration needs to keep in mind, because the left is not playing. They're not playing games.
No, yeah. My friend Jeff Dice was the president of the Mises Institute. Always says the left's serious. The right, they say things, but it never happens. The left, when they tell you something, they are going to do it, and they are serious, especially when it comes to hating and trying to destroy voices like yours and mine. Let me ask you in closing here. I've mentioned him, I think, a couple times already. What's the impact of Tucker Carlson on the right?
Tucker changed the game when it came to right-wing. He ran a show that for several years was basically like the nexus of right-wing thought and entertainment. Like, he set the tone in a way that probably no one since Rush Limbaugh has done. And he shifted the direction of a lot of what is happening. Now, Tucker's move to Twitter has obviously in some ways freed him. He can do a lot more. He can say a lot more. But I'm not one of these people who looks at Twitter numbers and is like, oh, Tucker got 9 bazillion views on Twitter, so he's more powerful than he's ever been. That's obviously not the case. Like, I love Twitter. It's very influential. But Twitter is not Fox News, man. Like, your grandparents are not on Twitter. Like, it is that is not, they are not getting their news from Tucker Carlson over there. They're still getting their news from Sean Hannity and whatever, and so some of his influence is diminished. There's also a bit of a return. I don't want to, to be very clear, I'm a great admirer of Tucker. I'm a big fan. So like, this is not to besmirch him or anything. But there's very clearly a move to kind of just doing random interviews as opposed to delivering powerful monologues that I think matters. Tucker used to sit down and deliver basically like the game-changing monologue almost every night. And he also did important things like read people's tweets. And I'm not just saying this because he read my tweet, but like those things mattered. They spoke to the average person. They connected people. People felt like they were involved in a conversation that was real and live, and you could be in it in any moment. And that just doesn't exist anymore. He's kind of like, out there interviewing random people and, alien stuff and whatnot. And, again, like, he can do his thing. Like, obviously he's much better at this than I am. He's where he is for a reason. But I just think there has been a little bit of a, I don't know. He certainly still drives the conversation, to be very clear. But I would like to see, where things are getting very real. I would like to see a very tight and laser focused Tucker Carlson who is bringing the top of his game because he's certainly capable of it, and the country needs it. And I hope that's what continues to happen.
All right. You mentioned it up top, the book. As this episode drops, guys, the book, The Total State, is out. Give your elevator pitch. I do honestly think my audience is a prime demographic that would love this book. So give your elevator pitch for the book.
Sure. Like I said, 2020, you see what happened. You watch everything unfurl. All the kind of things about government, how it's supposed to be constrained by checks and balances and the Constitution, Bill of Rights, popular sovereignty, democracy is what holds all of this thing together. And, that's what's supposed to control the state. And then you realize, actually, no, the government is bigger and more powerful than it's ever been. And you ask the question, what happened here? Like, why did liberal democracy, why did the Constitution, why did all of these things not constrain government? Why did it only grow and become more powerful under this? And so the Total State is explaining why these mechanisms did not hold back the government, how, in fact, in some ways, democracy actually accelerates the growth of government and its power, what actually constrains government, the rise of the managerial elite and large bureaucratic structures, and why they make it very difficult for us to have limited government in the healthy, virtuous way that we talked about during the show. And I also go ahead and explain why ultimately these kind of globalizing systems will fail. They are doomed. They are unsustainable. And what we should be doing in the meantime to prepare for when kind of the government leviathan that has arisen inside what were Western democracies starts to come apart.
Well put. Twitter, The Blaze, your show, anything you'd like to plug, now is the time.
Oh yeah, man, just the classics. I'm on Blaze TV. I have the Auron MacIntyre show on your favorite podcast platforms. I write a column over at The Blaze every week. I'm on Twitter, YouTube, all those places. Excellent.
And regarding your show and the fact that you come on shows like mine, I should thank you for as big as a platform as you have, getting some pretty dissident people in my circles on your show quite often. And I think that's really cool that you do that. And then coming on shows like this, I know you're busy, you've blown up, and I love it that we have a good voice on our side with such an audience. So Auron MacIntyre, thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that chat with Auron MacIntyre. Next week, we've got a very good guest coming back onto the show, friend of the show, Clark Carlson's coming back, and we are discussing some deep and important topics in and around Orthodox Christianity. Clark is a never miss guest. So, until next week, you guys have a good one. See ya.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.